trip to the potty.
Oh, amen. That's exciting.
Oh yeah, yeah, just what I wanted to see this morning, but yeah, progress.
Young man starting to grow up.
I had to scold my granddaughters last night. They went to somebody's birthday party Friday night and came home, and yesterday my son-in-law's sister here in town, her and her future husband had a wedding party, so he went to a party and came home last night, and I said, okay girls, we're going to have to get something straight right now. You went to a party Friday night and you came home, and you went to a party yesterday and you came home, and Papa's sitting here without no cake. So we're going to have to get that fixed. Take your Bible and turn to chapter 18 this morning, the book of Revelation. And a lot of folks want to know, they ask, is the Babylon mentioned, referred to in chapter 18, the same as the Babylon we talked about in chapter 17? Some think so, some don't. I think the answer is yes and no.
Right.
There's definitely similarities between the two. Both of them are ruled over by the Antichrist. Both of them have ruling queens. Both of them are filled with blasphemy, and both of them hate and kill the saints of God. But you remember from our lesson last week at the midpoint, that 3.5 years into the tribulation period, we learned that the false prophet and the false religion, the kings of the earth, turned on them after they'd given their kingdoms and their power over to the Antichrist. Now, I believe during the first 3.5 periods we were talking about the false religion, the false prophet, we are actually talking about a restored, revived Rome. That's the headquarters in the beginning of the tribulation period for the false religion. But after that, the kings turned their power over and they turned on the queen or false religion. The Antichrist takes completely over. And so from that point on, the last 3.5 years, all power, all control, everything that the Antichrist does takes place from a restored Babylon. And I do believe this is not symbolic or figurative. I believe that Rome is going to be restored, rebuilt for that end time, as well as Babylon. The Antichrist will rebuild and restore that ancient city, because that is the beginning of all idol worship and blasphemy. He will restore that ancient city for his short reign here on the earth. Well, let's begin chapter 18, verses 1 and 3. And as we get into that, I just want to remind you, chapter 17 last week dealt with the destruction of false religion.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 18 mainly deals with the destruction of Babylon, the one world government, or here specifically deals with commerce and trade, money. So let's begin this morning, verses 1 through 3. After these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies.
Yes.
Well, John saw another angel coming out of heaven, described as having great authority, and that this angel illuminated the earth. Now, a lot of people jump straight to the fact, because it's mentioned here of illuminating the earth, having that kind of glory, that this has got to be Jesus. But what have we learned as we go through this book? When John uses the term another, it's always another of the same kind as the angel he was introduced to in chapter 17. Now, this angel was so fresh out of heaven, maybe straight from the throne of God, that God's glory was still upon him. And as he came to make his pronouncement, that glory was bright enough to light the whole of the world. And immediately I thought about John chapter 3, verse 19, when he proclaims, this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, but men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds are evil. Now, I don't know at this point in time as this takes place here, because this has got to be right at the very end of the tribulation period, just prior to Christ coming back, setting foot on the Mount of Olives, and establishing his millennial reign. How many there could possibly be left, having refused to bow down to the beast, having refused to worship his image, having refused to take his mark? Is it possible that there are still some left at this point that have refused to worship the beast? But the angel declares, Babylon, that great city, is fallen, and he repeats it. I mean, this was so an enormous news event for the world at that time. He has to repeat it, that Babylon is fallen. And not only that, it has become the dwelling place of everything that you would call evil, the dwelling place of demons, the dwelling place of devils, and oddly, it talks about here, a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. I heard some talk about, well, birds in the Bible are always a reference to something evil or wicked. And I thought, no, that's not so. I mean, at times the spirit of heaven coming down has appeared as a dove. Ravens fed Isaiah. I mean, not all birds were evil, but there were some evil birds, because you know, in Jesus' parable of the sowers, seeds were sown, and evil birds, evil fowl, before those seeds could sprout, came and ate them, plucked them up. So anyway, you can draw the picture, the conclusion here of Babylon as being nothing left in this city, starting with the Antichrist and working from his demons right on down to the lost and the wicked of this world. that's still left, that's still alive. There was nothing, I mean nothing good to be found in Babylon. And what this is telling us is that by this time, pretty much all the nations of the earth, they've bowed down and submitted to the Antichrist. John says here they've drunk, they've shared in that cup of wine that's going to come from the wine press of God's wrath. And as such, not just those in Babylon, but the whole earth, everyone, everything that shared in submitting to the worldly system of this one world government, this form of commerce that demanded that you be part of the beast system and comply with him, are going to share in the fate of the city of Babylon. Well, that means the whole earth, all the kings, the rulers, the leaders, they've all forsaken God. They've committed, the Bible here uses a familiar expression we often find throughout the Old Testament and the New, that oftentimes disobedience, rebellion, idol worship is associated with God's idea or picture of the marriage, as he looks at it as an illicit or an illegal affair, having committed fornication with Babylon, that whore. And he tells us the merchants of the earth, all those who do business under this beast system, have become rich. So apparently, as Babylon rises, maybe prior to the tribulation, but certainly during the tribulation, it's going to become the center, probably much like New York City is now to the world. But that's going to take place, and that's going to change, where Babylon is going to become probably, well, if I understand this correctly, the most wealthy city on the planet, where all business, all trade, all commerce will have to go through Babylon and the Antichrist. Now let's look at an important message here in verses 4 and 5. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities." Well, I mean, like I said, I don't know if there's people still left at this point who could possibly still be holding out in defiance of the Antichrist, but this is certainly God's last call to those people, if there are any. But his message is, come out of her, my people. And I mean, literally, this is your last chance, your last opportunity before this tribulation period comes to a close, and your rightful Lord and King comes back to your earth to rule and to reign. But I think there's a message that transcends all ages. It's a message that we find in the Bible from the very beginning all the way here to almost the very end of the book of Bible. A message to those who believe and trust God, especially a message to Christians. Listen, I know you've got to live in this world, but be not conformed to it. Romans 12:2 says, "Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds." And I guess the idea, the message that really is coming across here as we look at Babylon as this great prophet, this great city of wealth. I mean profit money-wise, not profit foretelling God's word here. But Matthew chapter 16, verse 26, what shall a man profit if he gain the whole world and yet lose his soul? The world, throughout the Bible, again, Old Testament and New, is tied to or associated to a system that is opposed to God. And as Christians, we're called over and over and over again. I mean, we could go all morning long here reciting Scripture, the verses that simply say, come out of this world, be not conformed to it.
Right.
Now, John tells us here the sins of this world, the sins of Babylon, have piled up like the Tower of Babel, reaching to heaven, and that God has remembered them. I run into folks all the time that say they're believers, that they trust in God, but they can't understand how things have gotten so bad, and yet God's not moved. God's not done something to judge this world. And we know the Bible tells us He makes it to rain on the just as well as the unjust.
Right.
There's no reason to think that ungodly people don't have the same opportunity to become wealthy, just the same as believers do. What matters to God is what we do with it once we have it. And I absolutely have come to the conclusion and believe God knows I wouldn't handle it good. That's why He's protected me from it. But non-believers, they like to acquire things. They like to have money. One, they put security into it that somehow that's going to protect them if times get bad. Another thing is they think it brings pleasure to them. And this over time has become very enticing or alluring to Christians. I mean, we've made mention before of how prior to Jerusalem's fall to Nebuchadnezzar, Israel was mostly an agricultural people. But after they spent 70 years in Babylon and went back home, they greatly became involved in the finances of the world. And so it had an effect upon those people. And remember, going home, many of them thought, I'd rather stay in Babylon.
Right.
So don't think that the world and the wealth, the riches, the pleasures, everything that the world pitches today isn't alluring to Christians. But oftentimes that allure to things simply means that we're being lured away from our Lord and Jesus to follow after material pursuits. And we've all known that brother or sister or member in our church in good standing who approached you in the hallway one day after church, who wanted to just make sure that you had the opportunity to get in on the ground floor of this wonderful offer, this great opportunity that he has, helping him sell insurance or Amway or many other things, using the church and the brothers and sisters of Christ in the church as something to be made profit of. And which one of us has not I mean, if we've raised kids in the 80s or so, which one of us has not been caught in the trap of the world? I just mentioned three things here: Cabbage Patch, Care Bear, and Tickle Me Elmo. Oh, Daddy, Christmas just won't be the same without Elmo. And so you chase frantically looking for one because the stores have deliberately not put them out on the shelves until they can charge higher prices for them. And ultimately, you find yourself marking down some dark alley that some guy's got the trunk of his car open and a $20 thing he's asking $200 for, and you're glad to give it because that's the only one you can find. How often have we as Christians got in debt over worldly things? Just had to have 2 new cars and a new boat, a new camper, new RV, a couple of jet skis to go with it. And we get our income strung out to the point that we actually owe more to the world bank system than we make, and we begin the practice of jumping credit cards, taking advantage of every 90-day interest-free offer the credit companies have to have. But in our spiritual life, we get ourselves to the point oftentimes that we can't tithe. We can't support missions. We can't do the things with our wealth that God's blessed us with because we've given up on that in an effort to keep up with the next door neighbors. So everything Babylon's being talked about here and being offered and being judged for is an enticement and an allure that has had great devastating effects on many Christians throughout the ages. Let's look now at verses 6 through 8. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judged her. You remember a couple lessons back when God turned all the fresh water to blood, and the angel came and praised the Lord because he turned the water to blood because they had shed blood. They were getting what they were deserving. Well, here God's multiplying. He's doubling the judgment, the punishment on Babylon. And that comes from Exodus chapter 22, where there is a double restitution required in cases of theft. And here the Lord is applying that to Babylon and all the partners, and we'll see here in just a minute the partners, the businesses, the traders, everybody that participated in the Babylonian form of government. But notice the rapid, the sudden destruction pronounced here in one day.
Right.
Now, a great city in one day is utterly going to be burned with fire. I'm going to tell you, there's only two things I can think of. That either somehow in all the chaos and the confusion and the warring and everything that's going on, Babylon gets hit with a nuclear weapon, or it's no stretch of the imagination that just with the thought, God can make that happen. And with the hand of God, He can totally, utterly destroy that city with just a thought. Look now, we got a little longer passage. I didn't want to spend a great deal of time going into each one of these individually, but they're all the people that were participating in this one world government and with the opportunities for profit and wealth that was there. Well, let's read verses 9 down through 19. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour, notice from 1 day, this has gone to 1 hour, is thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more, the merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all fine wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. We're going to spend a minute on that when we get there. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught, and every shipmaster and all the company in ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour is she made desolate. The fall of commercial Babylon results in great sadness and lamentation throughout the world. The kings of the world are lamenting her destruction, the merchants, the shippers of the goods of the world. They're all sad, mourning, lamenting the fall of Babylon. So, can we garner from what the angel was telling John here that it is true, money cannot buy happiness. It can buy things, but it cannot buy peace, joy, love. And this is what the kings and all these other people, they put their faith in this. I mean, this literally became their existence, their life. And it was all wrapped up in material things and money. And when that Babylon fell, so did everything they have. Now I notice here that the judgment on Babylon was so great, you find the reference here several times over that those mourning her fall had to do so from a great distance. The judgment was so severe, so harsh upon Babylon that, oh yeah, they were saddened to see it go because they knew what that meant from him. It definitely was a riches to rags story in 1 hour. They had everything when the city stood there. They had nothing when that city fell. And all the merchants the Bible talks about here made great wealth off of selling all the goods that was available to them and made available to them by the Antichrist. Everything that Babylon had to offer, they peddled it. Not all material goods, a lot of it sin, wickedness, and fornication, but they peddled it all around this world. They thought they had everything, but they stored their treasures in the wrong barn. And now they were standing back and doing so from afar and just watching everything burn. Even the sea captains, I think in our day and time we could add truckers, railroad companies, everything and everyone that had something to do with shipping or transporting goods around this world. They're all lamenting because the judgment of Babylon just taken away their security blanket. Who are they going to trust now? It's obvious the Antichrist has failed them. It's obvious money has failed them. All the wealth, the power, prestige, everything that they had, that's all failed them. It's hard to even fathom or imagine watching that all crumble and take place in 1 hour. I mean, let alone even 1 day. But the Bible here narrows that down to in 1 hour. This happens and takes place, and all Babylon is fallen. Look now in verses 20 through 24. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of harpers and musicians and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints, and all that were slain upon the earth. I just remembered something I wanted to talk about from the last passage, and I forgot and skipped over. Let's go back to that business of buying and selling in the souls of men. The first thing I happened to think about was, as bad as human trafficking is today, it must be going to be a lot worse, and I'm sure it will be, during the tribulation period. But I think there's another thing to think about here is there have been so-called churches throughout history that would charge a family or a person to have someone baptized. And if it so be you just couldn't afford it at that time and someone died, well, you still weren't out of luck. Because with a certain donation, a certain sum to the church, you could pray that person out of the place of torment and into heaven. Things called Christianity, things called the church, literally buying and selling in the souls of men. Let's look here now in verse 20 through 24. The angel says, "Rejoice that God has avenged the blood of the prophets and of the saints." Christians, we don't rejoice that God is judging the world. We don't rejoice that God is bringing His wrath, His destruction, harm to the world. But what we do rejoice about is that God's righteous judgment is moving and happening, and the world is simply paying the price for having turned its back and rejected Him for all these ages. You remember that group of elders back in the beginning? How long, O Lord, how long do we have to wait?
Right.
Well, here's the answer to that. Because of the blood that they shed, because of the blood that the saints throughout the tribulation period, throughout the church age, because of the blood of the prophets, one last final stroke of judgment here upon this planet, this earth, the people that have given their hearts and their lives over to wickedness. That wrong is being made right. Now God is avenging them. And it's important for us when, we're Christians. It's no doubt that at some point, somewhere in our life, a neighbor's going to do something that's going to wrong us. A co-worker's going to do something that is going to bring harm or hurt to us. Don't take matters into your own hands. Leave it to God and His timing. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I shall repay. He just may take a little longer to do it than what we'd like, but He will do it. The time of His avenging all the wrongs that have been done and committed against His people will come. And the angel took a stone here and cast it into the sea. And I happened to think about back to Nebuchadnezzar's statue in Daniel, as the last thing we see is that stone coming from heaven. Now we know in Daniel that stone was Jesus Christ. But that stone coming from heaven that crushed those 10 toes, that put an end to that. And we'll get to the next chapter, what we're going to be taking a look at. But it also reminds me, Jeremiah chapter 4, he instructed a person named Sarai to bind a stone to his prophecy and to cast it into the Euphrates, a prophecy that pronounced God's judgment on Babylon. And so that rock and that little piece of paper, that prophecy, that's probably laid in there for all these thousands of years. But it's not going to pass by God. God's remembered their sins. God's remembered what He had Jeremiah do. God remembered all the prophecies that He's had His prophets declare against Babylon. and he's going to bring all of that to an end. All of Babylon's beauty, all of her opulence, the system that the whole world had bowed down to now and worshiped is destroyed. And it's never to rise to power ever again. From the very beginning, from the Garden of Eden, Satan has made business of deceiving God's people. No longer will he be allowed to do that. Pride and arrogance were part of the reason God brought his judgment upon Babylon. She thought she didn't need him, thought she was better than him. She thought the world system that he established could not be hurt or altered. But verse 24 gives us the ultimate reason why all of these plagues, why all of this has taken place, why everything that we've looked at that just breaks your heart at times to think about all of this happening to the world and to the people of the world, because God has avenged the blood of the prophets and the saints who stood faithful when the world system came after them and they refused to bow down and worship it. Thanks for being here this morning.